When Farrah Fawcett caught her husband Ryan O'Neal in bed with another woman, it was only the tip of the iceberg. In a twisted turn of events, O'Neal's excuses proved far more disturbing than the infidelity itself, but we will touch more on this later. Ryan O'Neal may have not come out of the womb fighting, but he was at it from a very early age. His father built him a boxing ring when he was just 7 years old. In his teens, O'Neal went on to train to become a Golden Gloves boxer at University High School in Los Angeles. As he set off into adulthood, this hot-tempered youth maintained his love for fighting in and out of the boxing ring. O'Neal's showbiz father moved the family to Germany when he was working as a writer on a TV show. O'Neal attended Munich American High School but soon grew restless. Recognizing his son needed more stimulation, O'Neal's mother found him a job as a stuntman on an American TV show. It wasn't long before O'Neal's love for acting fully blossomed. O'Neal's blonde, clean-cut hair and innocent blue eyes were a perfect disguise for his fiery disposition. When O'Neal was 18, he got into an argument with a stranger at a party. Instead of using his words like many others do, O'Neal did something much worse. He went on the attack. But this was no ordinary party fight. O'Neal spent 51 days in prison for it, but this incident alone barely scraped the surface. Once he returned to the US, O'Neal married the lovely actress Joanna Moore, but that wasn't all. He also landed a desired role on America's first primetime soap. O'Neal became a star overnight, and he and his beautiful wife quickly became the talk of the town. Fans across America looked up to this perfect couple, but behind the scenes, life proved far from golden. O'Neal and Moore had 2 children. The kids grew up in Hollywood, and O'Neal and Moore spent more time drinking and doing illicit substances than they did with their own children. But their problems went beyond neglect. There was something much more sinister happening at the O'Neal household. Because of O'Neal and his wife's partying, the children were frequently forgotten. They often found themselves fading into the blurry background as the party raged on around them. But Tatum O'Neal paints an even darker picture for her home life. She claims that because her parents weren't around, friends of the family put their hands on them. Sadly, this was just the beginning of the tragic childhood her father gave her. O'Neal and Moore's partying spun out of control. It didn't help that Moore tried to patch up her failing career with even more booze. Everything about their marriage fell into a downward spiral. There were also shocking allegations against O'Neal claiming he battered his wife. So it is safe to say life at the O'Neal residence became overwhelmingly toxic, and Moore finally got the courage to pack up and leave. But after leaving their father, the children faced an even darker nightmare. When the two decided it was finally time for them to split, it left Moore struggling with addiction and now depression. Tatum O'Neal has some harsh memories of having little food and using the floor as a bathroom. But her worst memory of all, her mother's teenage boyfriend would frequently do horrible things to her. But what about O'Neal? Where was he during all of this? Well, O'Neal's ex-wife and children were living the worst parts of their life. O'Neal gracefully remarried in Hawaii. This time it was with lead Taylor Young, one of his many co-stars. Together, they had a son who they named Patrick, but once again, O'Neal proved that he wasn't cut out for marriage. At the end of their relationship, Taylor Young had some interesting words to say about her husband. After their short marriage, the press talked to Taylor Young about what she thought about her ex-husband O'Neal, and she said, "I could speak to parts of Ryan like temper and reactivity, but I deeply know his goodness." But while his ex-wife took the road of neutrality, O'Neal's actions spoke for themselves. Not only did he have a penchant for anger, he also had one for revenge. No one seems to remember the specifics, but O'Neill became enraged by something unflattering that Rona Barrett wrote about him. It is common for actors to get some bad publicity from time to time, but what isn't common was O'Neill's excessive and potentially deadly retaliation. After reading Barrett's enraging comments, O'Neill crafted a convincing plan. One day, Barrett received a package with no return address and opened it to find something that made her blood run cold: a live tarantula. O'Neill was later overheard bragging about this episode. In spite of his vicious act, America was about to fall head over heels in love with Ryan O'Neill. O'Neill and many other prominent actors at the time were all approached with the same role, but only O'Neill saw something that the others didn't, and boy was he right. 1970's Love Story, which would later become the world's #1 Wheatfest, launched O'Neill's career into the stratosphere and even earned him a nomination for Best Actor. But even though taking on the film was the right choice, he still made a significant mistake. O'Neill raked in only $25,000 for starring in Love Story. However, what made O'Neill angry was that his co-star, whose husband was the Paramount studio head, received a percentage of the film's profits, thus securing her a fortune. O'Neill, lacking clout and foresight, never made a similar deal and lost out on a ton of money. But O'Neill soon found many other ways to reap his reward. Portraying a young, handsome man who loses his wife to cancer turned O'Neill into a babe magnet. The rumor was that O'Neill didn't have to flirt. He simply had to walk into a room to get any woman he wanted. O'Neill was a total womanizer, but it wasn't long before his fatherly duties interrupted this agenda. O'Neill's ex-wife passed the point of no return. Guilty of utter neglect, she became unfit to raise the youngsters Tatum and Griffin. Clearly, O'Neill himself wasn't up for Dad of the Year, but surely he'd be better than the addicted and depressed Moore. O'Neill got on board for parenting, and soon found a surprising way to blend his movie star career with his fatherhood responsibilities. However, though, a silver lining teased the edges of his cloudy personal life. Peter Bogdanovich had already directed O'Neill in the zany comedy What's Up Doc with Barbra Streisand, and was looking for a father-daughter team to appear in his new film, Paper Moon. When Paul Newman and his daughter dropped out, O'Neill and Tatum were offered the roles. But O'Neill truly thought that this was his golden ticket, that the elusive Oscar was in reach. But despite the film's success, nothing went as planned. In Paper Moon, O'Neill plays a conman who uses a fake daughter as a way to grift various people of their hard-earned cash. Given O'Neill's disappointing track record as a father, this wasn't a stretch for him. But while his performance was more than convincing, it was young Tatum who stole every scene. In fact, the Academy nominated Tatum and not O'Neill. Enraged by his snub and resenting his daughter's success, O'Neill made a shocking decision. Tatum O'Neill went on to win the Best Supporting Actress award, becoming the youngest to win a competitive Oscar. When a clearly startled 10-year-old Tatum took to the podium and looked across the sea of adoring peers, she couldn't help but notice a glaring omission. Neither of her parents attended the ceremony. Clearly, O'Neill had better things to focus on, like himself and his own career. The O'Neill household overflowed with all sorts of bad influences for the children. O'Neill's substance habit meant that sketchy dealers were frequently visiting the home. On one occasion, a dealer came up to Tatum unsupervised. That's when something terrible happened. That individual touched Tatum unconsensually. Tatum, devastated and distraught, she mustered up the courage to tell her father the terrible truth. When Tatum told her father about the horrific run-in with the dealer, O'Neill blamed his daughter, insisting that she must have led him on. And then, O'Neill made matters worse, much worse. He kept the accused dealer on the payroll. In O'Neill's mind, daughters were a dime a dozen, but a good dealer was hard to find. O'Neill's parenting advice wasn't just appalling, it was downright dangerous. When teenage Tatum O'Neill started to put on a few extra pounds, O'Neill swooped in with some fatherly advice. Since there were so many different substances lying around the house, he suggested she take some of them for weight loss. However, though, her father's poor judgment led Tatum down a dark, dangerous path. O'Neill's daughter struggled with many things: her crazy father, her addiction to substances, and her unstable home life. In a moment of despair, she made a life-threatening decision. She attempted to end it. Luckily, her attempt proved unsuccessful. To add to the devastation, O'Neill failed to offer Tatum a single shred of empathy. Instead, O'Neill criticized her attempt with outlandish remarks. Sadly though, O'Neill's daughter wasn't the only victim of his neglect. He also had it in for his son. Griffin O'Neill maintains that when he was 11 years old, his father offered him substances. O'Neill absolutely denies this, claiming he'd never share his expensive substances with anyone, let alone Griffin. But whether this claim is true or not, O'Neill's track record speaks for itself. For O'Neill, his children were never the main concern, and unfortunately, they always paid the price. O'Neill's buddy, the $6 million man Lee Majors, had coupled up with Farrah Fawcett and formed a formidable Hollywood twosome. While shooting a show up in Canada, Majors had concerns that his angel would get bored while he was away. Majors didn't seem to know O'Neill that well because he made a big blunder. Majors asked O'Neill to take his wife out on a date, just to keep her company. What happened next, though, should surprise, well, absolutely no one. O'Neill, following Majors' instructions, asked Fawcett out. Like an angel, Fawcett obediently told her husband about it and he forbade her to go on the date. Maybe Majors realized O'Neill's poor reputation and changed his mind, but the damage was already done. O'Neill wanted Fawcett for himself, and with his determination, nothing could stop him, not even the $6 million man. While O'Neill planned his seduction of Fawcett, her husband was stuck up in Canada, powerless to prevent his friend's disloyal schemes. No matter how many times he called O'Neill to warn him away, Majors could do little more than slam the phone down and hope for the best. As always, and to no one's surprise, O'Neill got his way. Fawcett soon separated from Majors and hooked up with her new lover. But how much of O'Neill's attention could one woman take? Farrah Fawcett was well regarded at the time for her beauty. O'Neill, however, felt obliged to give Fawcett beauty tips. One such tip was to wear less makeup, so Fawcett gave it a try, and when her former manager told her she looked tired, O'Neill nearly jumped across the table and choked him. O'Neill had good reason to be optimistic about having a child with Fawcett. After all, she wasn't plagued with his ex-wife's self-esteem and addiction issues. Having already failed as a father twice, O'Neill was eager to prove himself. When Fawcett gave birth to Redmond James Fawcett O'Neill in 1985, he stepped up to the plate. This time, however, O'Neill's blunders dipped to an all-time low. O'Neill's child with Fawcett struggled even more than his siblings. By the time he was a teenager, O'Neill was supplying him with substances. As a result, Redmond ended up in 13 different rehabilitation centers. At one of his hearings, the state ruled him incompetent to stand trial. To top it all off, his father looked down on him with disappointment. When Redmond was in prison and facing the lowest time of his life, his father's comments to Vanity Fair magazine brought him even lower, saying so many arrests, the poor stupid boy. O'Neill and Fawcett let Redmond live on the streets as they didn't know how to help him. In 2001, O'Neill found out that he had leukemia. Fawcett was no longer his girlfriend, but she quickly became his caregiver and nursed him until he saw remission. But their medical troubles didn't end there. When Fawcett received her own cancer diagnosis, O'Neill stepped up. Within this double tragedy, the two reunited. But don't expect a happily ever after. It's Ryan O'Neill after all. O'Neill stayed by Fawcett's side through her cancer treatment, and together they made it through. During a party meant to celebrate Fawcett's happy recovery and 60th birthday, the O'Neill household came together. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but it was only a matter of time. After Fawcett retired for the evening, O'Neill and his clan promptly turned the celebration of life into a celebration of dysfunction. An argument broke out between O'Neill and his son Griffin after Griffin allegedly attacked his father with a fireplace poker. Fawcett, who was sleeping peacefully upstairs, awoke to the horrible noise, the sound of a weapon being fired. By the time the authorities arrived, details of the incident were sketchy. O'Neill claimed he shot his son out of self-defense. After all, Griffin had gone off on a rampage, even injuring his own pregnant wife. O'Neill brandished the weapon with intention of scaring his son, but it had all gone wrong. Officers took O'Neill away, but later sent him home on a $50,000 bond. When Fawcett's cancer came back with a vengeance, O'Neill made an important decision. Faced with losing her, he proposed, but sadly, they never made it to the altar. Just before the priest arrived to officiate the wedding, Fawcett passed away. Instead of saying his vows, O'Neill listened to her last words. He carried his grief with him until the day of her funeral. It was there that he came face to face with a beautiful stranger. After Fawcett's funeral, O'Neill said goodbye to his partner of 3 decades. At the ceremony, a blonde woman he didn't recognize gave him a hug of condolences. Unsurprisingly, he responded suggestively, hitting on his affectionate stranger. But this wasn't just any woman. The two of them have met before. After getting a good look at the blonde funeral attendant, O'Neill realized that he was staring at his very own daughter. It all clicked into place when she said, "Daddy, it's me, Tatum." Having not seen Tatum for 5 years, O'Neill hadn't recognized her at all. Unsurprisingly, this awkward reunion reflected the sad state of their relationship. It was beyond repair. Amid all the family drama and before Fawcett's unfortunate passing, O'Neill still had time to become a terrible husband. Fawcett was one of the most sought-after beauties in America, and yet O'Neill had the audacity to cheat on her. Fawcett literally walked in on O'Neill in bed with another woman, model and actress Leslie Stephenson. But it wasn't even the most upsetting part. O'Neill's defense sounded downright creepy. Caught in the act, O'Neill told Fawcett that Stephenson was more like a daughter than a lover, saying this, "My own daughter had flown the coop, so here was this replacement." This comment was about the woman he was sleeping with. O'Neill always managed to twist his own wrongdoings into ridiculous cover-ups. But at the end of the day, this story wasn't twisted at all. He was. On December 8th, 2023, Ryan O'Neill's eventful, controversial life came to an end. At 82 years old, he passed from congestive heart failure and was interned next to Farrah Fawcett's grave. As with so many of his dysfunctional relationships, O'Neill's loves just couldn't seem to leave him in the end. Don't forget, if you've enjoyed this story or stories alike, make sure to show some love by subscribing and liking this video. Stay tuned for some more informative and exciting stories like this one.